Okay guys, here is the SAB Lizard. I've built this thing as a EDF version. This is going to be kind of a build video, more to show all the special things that I've noted with the airplane and kind of go over the equipment and where I've placed everything. I don't usually do videos, but I've gotten a few requests to do a build video for this airplane. So I'm going to start out by going over the verticals, followed by the wings, EDF placement, and where I've placed everything else in the airplane, as well as some of my settings that I've used for the airplane. This airplane flies fantastic. It is one of my favorite airplanes to take to the field. I've got a few videos on my page showing how well this thing flies. Absolutely love this airplane. So I'm going to get started. Again, let's head off to the verticals. Alright, so here's the vertical stabilizers and the rudder. For the rudder servo, I'm using the MKS 6130 wing servos, and the horn is the MKS servo horn recommended for this servo. I have it out on the farthest hole. I had to drill out just a little bit to get it to fit, but that's at about 15 millimeters. The book calls for 20 millimeters, but here's the one I have assembled. If you move the servo to its full extent, it's not even all the way, and it's already bottomed out the rudder, so 15 millimeters should work just fine. Now, one thing I did notice with the rudders is on the manual it shows that it wants the servo horn on the front side, the leading edge side of the vertical, with the push rod heading backwards towards the rudder. I found out you cannot do that. I had to put mine towards the rear of the slot, so instead of having the servo like this, I had to install it like this. And the reason for that is the push rod, if you do not turn it around, in order to get the required length to reach from the servo to the control arm, there's only a millimeter or two of thread showing on the linkage, and definitely not strong enough. But with it set this way, you can pretty much bottom out the linkage, and it is about as strong as it can get. One more thing with making the servo plate, I did have to sand down the corners so that they'll fit in the holes better, and also I sanded down a little bit here, and the reason for that is so when the servo sits in the wood tray, there is enough room for the servo wire to sit without being bent or binding on that wood tray. Alright, so here's the wings on the Lizard. It's pretty straightforward. You just take a plate, attach a servo. I'm using the Savox 1260 MGs. I went with the mini servos. You can use standard servos if you want. The reason I went with the minis is they got plenty of torque. These are 166 ounce torque, or 12 kilos. The manual recommends at least 10, so 12 should be fine. The reason I went with minis is also, if you can see, the screws that hold the aluminum brackets on are actually countersunk into the plate, where if you use standard servos, it uses these other holes. And then you have a standard screw where the screw head sticks up. I like it better. The mini servos work just fine. As for the servo arm, I'm using Cortex servo arms. The manual calls for 21 millimeters from hole to ball link, and this gives me 20, so that's close enough for me. And because of that, these use I think it's a 3 millimeter hole for a ball link, so you can't use the ball links supplied because these are 2 millimeter. So I ended up getting the, see if I can find them real quick. Here they are. These are SAB ball links. These are the 3 millimeter ball links for helicopters. They thread right into the Protec servo arms, and they are nice and snug on the ball links. Other than that, everything on the wing is very straightforward. One thing I forgot to mention, I elected to go without the grommets on the servo. I know there's a huge debate about whether to use them or not. It's a jet. I don't think I need them. Plus, the provided screws, if you use the grommets, only go into the aluminum brackets about 1 millimeter, so there's not enough thread to actually hold the screw and get them tightened down. So I removed the grommets, and you can see the screws are actually flush with the bottom. They stick out just a little bit, but because of that, I did have to grind down the bottom of this opening. It wasn't much. It was maybe about 1/16 of an inch, maybe a 3/32 of an inch, to get the opening wide enough so that the bottom of my servo arm clears the opening. Alright, here's the front canard. Want to try to save you a little bit of headache. If you don't get anything out of this video, hopefully this will help you. I'm using the Savox 2292. It has over 600 ounces of torque, so plenty for the canard. A little bit overkill. But one of the things I want to point out is that the manual on the push rod, the short end says DX, and the long end says SX. Now, I fought with this linkage for about an hour, hour and a half. I thought something was messed up with this linkage, but it turns out they translated everything except for those. And in Italian, DX apparently is the acronym or short way to say right hand. SX is the way to say left hand. So this is a standard right-handed thread. This is a non-standard left-handed thread. So you have to thread this one on backwards. It's not explained anywhere in the manual, but that means right-hand thread. That means left-handed thread. Hopefully that could save you a little bit of trouble, and hopefully, like me, an hour and a half of trouble trying to get this linkage, just getting this ball link threaded onto this rod. Alright, here's a quick little overview of the wiring that I did the Lizard before I start putting some of the hatches on so we can't see. It's a Jetfan Pro 120 millimeter. I used 2 spacers on the motor mount to raise the fan up. I did end up having to sand a little bit of the thrust ring down here at the bottom so that the fan would sit right. It is right flush with the bottom right there. The speed controller I ended up mounting up front because it was a lot bigger than it was able to fit back here. So I used the mount supplied, and I high-soled it into place here. Mounted the speed controller here, ran the wires up past here, there is a bulkhead. It's hard to see. There is a bulkhead under here that you have to cut a little bit so that the fan will fit all the way down, and that gave me a space to run the wires back for the motor. The servo wires run from this side of the airplane through here to join up with the servo wires from this side of the airplane, and they all run in this snake skin all the way up to the front here, and the wires end up coming out this side and going into my Cortex Pro. I've got channels 1 through 6. 1 and 2 are the Elevons, 3 and 4 are the Rudders, 1 and 2 are the Elevons, 3 is the Canard, 4 and 5 are the 2 Rudders, and 6 is the nose wheel steering. Then I have the gear and brake lines run up from one side here, join with the other side. I build a small little mounting bracket for the gear controller right here. I do have telemetry on the speed controller, and all those wires join up and go through these 2 snake skins up this side of the plane and come out this hole and join up with the receiver here. I've got the Futaba receiver set to, can't remember what mode it is, but I have channels 9 through 15. The 8th slot is for S-Bus, which is connected to the gyro, and S-Bus 2 is connected to the telemetry off the speed controller. Channel 9 is the throttle, 10 is the gear, and 3 is the brake. Got plenty of room to add lights here in the future. But here's all the wiring for the Lizard before I put the hatches on, so I can't video them later. Okay, a little bit more about the EDF installation. Again, this is a Jetfan Pro 120 millimeter with the inlet ring. I've got the HET 800-68-685 kV motor with the heatsink. I'm using 2 spacers on each side, and the placement of the fan, I did have to sand the mounting rails just a little bit on either side to allow the fan to sit all the way down, but I've got the thrust ring even with the front edge of the mounting plates. Again, you have to sand, or you have to cut out the former right there and there on either side. Again, per the instructions for an EDF version, you have to remove the thrust vectoring mounting bulkhead that sits right here, and I also sanded these down just a little farther to allow the air to come out of the back a little bit better. I elected to go without a thrust tube on this airplane. The airplane performs great without it. I do have the material, and I have thought about putting the tube in. I probably will in the future. I just haven't gotten around to it. I love the way the airplane flies, so I'm not really going to change it at the moment, but it could be my winter project on this airplane. Alright, moving on to my batteries. I use 2 GenAce 6-cell batteries. They are 5600 milliamps each. They butt end to end on the tray. The front of my battery ends up even with the back end of this plate. With that, I was not able to completely balance the airplane, so I built this tray on the front end of the airplane. It is 130 millimeters across and 180 millimeters long. I've got 2 battery packs. It's a 3500 2S operated off a power switch that
runs to the Cortex Pro and the receiver. I have a 2400 milliamp 2S pack ran off this switch that runs back to the gear and brake controller in the back. This ended up actually balancing the airplane perfectly. I did not have to add or move anything once I got it set. I mounted it straight to the landing gear bracket. I added braces on the bottom. It is very strong. There's a bracket on each side. Again, bolted straight to the landing gear bracket mounted to the front end of the airplane. The Cortex, I found that my gain settings were very low. On all 3 axes, I have the gain set to 3. So all axes are gain of 3. So that's pretty much my overview of the airplane. Again, it flies great. I'm going to add some pictures to the end of the video to show kind of how I set things up, mainly detailing the radio tray and speed controller and fan. Thanks for watching. The pictures are right after this, and awesome airplane. You're gonna love it. One more item I forgot to mention. All my control surfaces are set up stock per the book. I did add a little extra expo to all the surfaces. I fly in high rates all the time. Does not seem to be a problem with the Cortex. For landing, I do have the drag rudder brake set up. Found that it slows the airplane down really nicely. And actually, because the verticals are at a slight angle, it puts a little bit of down pressure on the tail, which actually allows me to put in a mix that will actually drop the canards just a little bit. It actually comes in a lot better. CG is right on book. As I said, I needed the tray to help me with that. I get about 3¼ to 3½ minutes of flight time with my 5600 12S packs. And the weight of this airplane ended up being, I believe it was 17.22 pounds. I'll have a picture of the balance gauge at the end of this video as well.